I saw something crouched in the corner of the witch room on my first night at the ancient Ram Inn, and every instinct I have ever trusted about what is human and what is not told me that the thing watching me did not belong to this world. I am a historian, trained to question legends and interrogate sources, a 30-year-old American doing his PhD in early modern British belief systems at the University of Cambridge. And yet in that moment, with my back pressed against the warped wooden headboard of a centuries-old bed in Gloucestershire, I felt as primitive and helpless as any villager from the witch trial records I study. I did not travel to England for this. I came for archives, for parish records, for depositions and court transcripts that tell us how people once believed the supernatural was braided into everyday life. The project that brought me to the ancient Ram Inn sounded straightforward on paper. My dissertation explores haunted heritage as a modern extension of early modern belief, a bridge between 16th century witch hunts and 21st century ghost tourism. The ancient Ram Inn kept appearing in my research as one of the most haunted places in England, an inn turned private residence in Wotton-under-Edge, Gloucestershire, built over older foundations tied to local stories of pagan rituals, witchcraft, child sacrifice, and restless spirits. It was an irresistible case study. I had read that builders once found a mummified cat sealed inside a wall there, a common apotropaic charm, a way to trap or divert evil. I had read that guests heard a baby crying in the men's kitchen, that people were pushed, scratched and pinned down in the bishop's room, that in the witch room, visitors reported seeing a woman crouched in the corner with her hair over her face, a condemned witch, who allegedly hid there before being dragged out and executed during the long shadow of witch trials that touched even rural Gloucestershire. All of that existed for me as text, as testimony to be weighed, categorized and footnoted. It was only when I stepped out of the taxi at dusk and saw the ancient Ram Inn in person that my academic distance began to erode. The building sagged under its own history, its timber frame buckled in strange angles, its stone walls stained and uneven. The roofline wavered as if it had been forced to bend under winds that no longer blew. Small, crooked windows stared out over the lane like half-closed eyes. There was nothing picturesque about it. It looked as if it had spent centuries absorbing other people's fear, and now could no longer straighten itself. I paid the owner in the dim front room, my suitcase at my feet. He was a soft-spoken man in his 60s with eyes that seemed permanently tired. He explained that tours had made the place survivable financially, that television crews from paranormal shows had filmed here, that people came from all over the world to experience what they believed to be real haunted places. When I mentioned my PhD at Cambridge and my focus on haunted history and witchcraft belief, something like resignation crossed his face as if he had heard every possible rational explanation and no longer cared to argue with any of them. He offered to show me around before it got fully dark. The interior was worse than the outside. The moment we stepped past the threshold, the air changed. It cooled sharply, not with the crispness of night air, but with the heavy damp of stone that has never fully dried out. The smell of old timber dust and faint rot pressed against the back of my throat. The floors were uneven, boards bowed and twisted, and every step produced a different creak or groan. The beams overhead were thick and blackened, running at angles that made no geometric sense, as if the house had been assembled from pieces that did not quite belong together. He pointed out areas I already knew by reputation. The men's kitchen, where visitors reported the sound of a baby crying, was darker than it should have been, the corners swallowing the weak light of a bare bulb. He gestured to a spot by the stairs where, during renovation decades earlier, human bones had been found, likely belonging to children, dug up alongside two small blades and stones, gouged with what might have been ritual markings. He spoke briefly of rumors that the site sat on old pagan ground, intersecting ley lines of energy that ghost hunters loved to talk about. To my surprise, he did not embellish any of it. There was no performance in his tone. He was not selling a story. He was reciting facts whose significance he had long since conceded to other people. When we climbed the warped staircase to the upper floor, the temperature dropped again. The corridor was narrow, the ceiling low. The boards squealed under our weight, and I could feel each nail shifting slightly as we moved. He stopped at a door on the left, its planks split and scarred, and rested his hand on the latch. "This is the witch's room," he said. "You will be staying here tonight." The room was small and skewed, its geometry subtly wrong. The ceiling sloped down from one side, supported by a beam that dipped more than seemed safe. A wooden bed with a high headboard and short, thick posts stood against the wall opposite a small, clouded window. The plaster walls were cracked, revealing the bones of the building beneath. In the far corner, to the right of the window and diagonal from the bed, the wall bowed inward slightly, just enough to catch the eye. Beneath that concavity, the floorboards were darker and more worn, as if people had stood or knelt there over and over. A weak electric lantern on a bedside table cast a yellowish pool of light that did not quite reach that corner, leaving it in deeper shadow. The owner stepped inside and looked at the far wall, his jaw tightening for a second. "People say she appears there," he said, nodding toward the corner. "A woman crouched down with her hair over her face. The story is that she hid here during the witch hunts, that they dragged her out and hanged her or burned her in the village. There are parish records of women tried for witchcraft in this region, though no one can say for certain which one, if any, is tied to this room. But people see her there. They say she stares, even though you cannot see her eyes." He pointed to a discoloration on the plaster above that spot, a patch of shadow that did not quite match the others, roughly the size of a human head. It looked like damp or smoke damage at first glance. But as I stared, it resolved into something more like a stain pressed deep into the wall, refusing to fade. "The builders found a mummified cat inside that wall when they were rewiring," he added. "Old charm. They used to seal cats, shoes, all sorts of things into the fabric of buildings to ward off evil or trap it. Personally, I do not know whether it traps anything. Sometimes it feels like it kept something in, and now that we opened it, that thing has more room to move." That last sentence hung between us with more weight than the crooked beam overhead. I told myself he was just a man who had lived too long with stories, that he had blurred the line between anecdote and explanation. I nodded, asked a few more polite questions about the age of the beams and any archival documentation of past owners, then assured him I would be fine for the night. When he left, taking his fading footsteps back down the hall, the silence that followed was heavier than it had any right to be. I set my bag on the bed and tried to reassert my identity as a researcher. I took notes in a small field notebook, sketching the room's dimensions, marking the warped floor, the angle of the window, the location of the corner where the supposed witch appeared. I wrote down sensory impressions for later analysis. Cold spot near the door, smell of old earth and stale smoke, plaster uneven with dark vertical streak above right corner. I told myself that any horror I felt was part of the data, that fear itself was an artifact when studying haunted heritage. I filmed a short video on my phone for my research log, speaking softly to the lens. This is the witch's room at the ancient Ram Inn in Gloucestershire, one of the most infamous real haunted places in England. Locals say a woman accused of witchcraft hid in this room during the 17th century before being taken and executed. A mummified cat was found in the wall near that corner behind me, where people now report seeing her crouched with her hair covering her face. I will be spending the night here to record environmental readings and personal impressions for my thesis on haunted history and belief. My voice trembled on the last word, more than I wanted it to. I ate a granola bar, drank some water, and tried to read by the lantern light, but the words on the page swam, unwilling to compete with the thick presence of the room. Outside, the last light faded, and the small window turned into a flat black rectangle. There were no city sounds here, no steady rumble of traffic, only occasional distant noises from the village and the restless shifting of the house itself as the temperature fell. The lantern hummed softly, throwing a shaky halo that left the corners dense and impenetrable. I lay down on top of the blankets, fully clothed, my notebook and phone on the small table beside me. I left the lantern dimmed, but not off. I wanted to say it was for practical reasons, to make note-taking easier if anything happened, but the truth was simpler. I did not want to be in the dark with those corners. Time blurred. My body drifted in that uneasy space between waking and sleep, where thoughts loosen and reshape themselves. The silence deepened until my own breathing sounded intrusive. The last thing I remember clearly before it began was the sensation that the mattress beneath me felt slightly damp with age, the fibers holding on to centuries of other sleepers. At some point around midnight, the air changed. It thickened as if the room had filled with invisible smoke that did not sting, but pressed inward on every surface. Breathing suddenly felt like work, each inhalation pushing against resistance. The temperature plunged, my skin prickled with cold and a fine sheen of sweat at the same time. I woke fully with a start, my heart punching against my ribs. For a moment, I did not know where I was. Then the smell hit me. It was a mingling of damp stone, scorched wood, and something sharper, like burnt herbs, the kind I had read about in accounts of protective charms and counterspells, rosemary, sage, rue turned bitter over a fire. I pushed myself up on my elbows, the blanket sliding down my chest, and turned my head toward the corner almost against my will. She was there, a figure, crouched low in the far right corner of the witch's room, exactly where the owner had pointed, where the floor dipped and the plaster stain lurked above. Her knees were drawn up under her chest, her spine bent at an unnatural angle that reminded me of a spider folding into itself. Long dark hair hung down over her face in a tangled curtain, obscuring every feature. The lantern's weak light did not seem to touch her directly. Instead, it outlined her, carving her shape out of the darkness. The space around her looked denser than the rest of the room, as if there were more night concentrated where she knelt. Every rational argument I had ever made about hauntings evaporated in the span of a heartbeat. There was no transition from empty corner to occupied corner that I could recall. One moment, my mind's eye pictured bare plaster and warped boards. The next, there was a woman folded into the space, as solid in outline as any living body. Terror crawled through me in slow, precise increments. My hands went numb, my mouth dried out. I could not tell if she was breathing. She did not move at all. It was the absolute stillness that made it unbearable. The instinct to call out, to speak, to demand an explanation rose in my throat and died there. I did not want whatever was under that hair to turn toward me. I do not know how long I lay frozen, watching her. The only sounds were my pulse drumming in my ears and a faint, irregular scratching from inside the wall behind her, as if something small and dry were dragging its claws along the laths. Whispers surfaced beneath that noise, too soft to pass into words, yet undeniably human in cadence, overlapping streams of breath like distant prayers or accusations. The lantern flickered. The hum in its filament rose and fell. Shadows jumped along the beams and then swam back into place. For a fraction of a second, the light guttered so low that the room nearly dropped into total darkness. When it flared back to its previous level, the corner was empty. The woman was gone. The air did not lighten. The smell of burnt herbs and old smoke clung to my tongue. My eyes shot to the place on the wall above where she had been. The discoloration that I had told myself was damp now seemed sharper. It was not just a patch of shadow. It had edges, curves, a faint suggestion of cheek and jaw. It was a head, or at least the impression of one, pressed into the plaster like something branded by heat or years of psychic repetition. It seemed darker than before, as if the pigment of the wall itself had surrendered to a new shape. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and set my feet on the boards. The wood leached the warmth from my skin. I told myself this was what I had come for, that I needed to document every detail while they were fresh. I reached for my notebook, but my hand trembled so badly the pen scratched nonsense. As I stared at the page, something under my heel gave slightly a subtle shift. One board near the corner felt looser than the rest. For a historian, curiosity survives even in fear. I moved toward it, each step feeling like a risk. The air pushed back against me, as if I were walking into a strong wind that had no direction. I knelt, the chill of the floor seeping through my jeans, and ran my fingertips along the seam of the planks. One corner of the board lifted with little effort. Beneath it lay a narrow cavity, just wide enough to fit a forearm. The smell that rose from it was concentrated decay, dust and something faintly organic that had long ago stopped being flesh but remembered it. I turned the lantern slightly so its light fell into the gap. A small, shriveled shape lay on the packed earth below, fur clinging in dry clumps to a twisted body. The head was tilted at an angle no living creature would adopt, jaws parted in a silent snarl. The empty sockets were dark pits, but what remained of the skin was stretched tight, preserving the impression of a last, terrified expression. It was a cat, mummified by time and enclosure. Exactly like the ones mentioned in the studies I had read about apotropaic deposits in English buildings, and specifically in accounts of the ancient Ram Inn. Seeing it there with my own eyes, instead of in a journal photograph, unmoored something in me. The lantern flickered again as if reacting to the exposure. The temperature in the room dropped in a measurable way, a sudden biting cold that made my breath plume in front of my face. The faint scratching in the wall behind the corner intensified, turning into a frantic scouring, as if nails or claws were raking wood in panic. A new smell layered itself over the others, the acrid sting of burning hair. I backed away from the hole, letting the board fall back into place with a dull, wooden slap. When I straightened, there was a sensation like static crawling up my spine. I turned toward the bed and froze. The corner was occupied again. She was back, crouched exactly where she had been, but this time the hair did not hide everything. Between the strands, 2 points of dull, reflected light caught the lantern glow. They were not the bright, clean reflections of living eyes. They were murkier, as if set deep in tissue that did not fully exist, yet they fixed on me with unmistakable focus. I could not look away. Those eyes were ancient and full of something more complicated than simple malice. They held terror, rage, and a kind of pleading that made my chest tighten. Images crashed into my mind without warning. I was no longer fully in the witch's room as a visitor. I stood outside the inn centuries earlier, watching a crowd gather, villagers with torches and farm tools, their faces twisted by fear and righteous anger. I saw a woman being dragged out of a doorway that might have been the very one downstairs, her wrists bound in front of her with rough rope, her hair tangled, her dress torn. She screamed words I could not make out, whether in prayer or curse I could not tell, over the roar of accusations: witch, consort, devil. They forced her through the yard, the torches lighting her profile with savage clarity. I felt the scratch of coarse rope on my own skin, the jolt of stones under bare feet. Then I was inside a dim space again, but not the inn as I knew it. The ceiling seemed lower, the walls rougher. She crouched in the corner where I had just seen her, gasping, pressing herself against the plaster as if she could press through it. Outside the door, footsteps pounded on the stairs, muffled shouts drawing closer. She clutched something to her chest. The shape slipped in my vision, but it felt like fur, like a small living weight wriggling in terror. Smoke seeped in under the door. The vision shuddered and fragmented. It felt less like memory and more like a forced overlay, a sequence being projected directly into my mind by something with far too much practice. I dropped to my knees, both from vertigo and from the pure force of emotion. Tears stung my eyes unbidden. My training told me I was experiencing a combination of suggestion, environmental stress, and the weight of layered narratives. My body disagreed. Every nerve screamed that I was not alone, that something intelligent and wounded was using me as a conduit. The room erupted in sound. Loud banging started in the wall behind the bed, heavy impacts as if someone were kicking from the other side. Scratches skittered along the plaster to my right, nails digging in long, jagged arcs. The blankets on the bed whipped sideways as if yanked by invisible hands. My jacket tugged sharply backward, fabric biting into my shoulders, and I pitched toward the floor, catching myself on my palms. A cold grip clamped around my ankle, fingers thin and impossibly strong, the chill biting straight into the bone. I cried out, a hoarse, unheroic sound that had nothing academic in it, and kicked instinctively. The grip tightened, then jerked, dragging my leg toward the corner. The boards rasped under my jeans. For a moment I thought I would be pulled all the way to her, that I would find myself pressed against that knot of shadow and hair, my face inches from whatever lay beneath it. "Stop!" I shouted, the word torn from me more as a plea than a command. The grip loosened. I scrambled backward, crab-walking until my shoulders hit the opposite wall. My chest heaved. The lantern's light wavered wildly, shadows spinning around the room. The stain on the wall above the corner shifted. It peeled away from the plaster like smoke disentangling from a ceiling. The shadow that had been a static imprint now hung in the air, head bowed, hair falling forward. Slowly, impossibly, it turned toward me. The witch's room felt alive, or rather inhabited from every direction at once. The walls seemed to pulse minutely, breathing. The floor thrummed with a faint vibration, like distant drums or the echo of many feet marching. The smell of burning intensified until my eyes watered, and beneath it rose another odor, thicker and more nauseating, the scent of charred flesh and green wood smoke. The figure in the corner began to rise. Her motion was fluid and terrible, every joint unfolding with the slow inevitability of someone reenacting movements lived before. Her head tilted back, and for the first time I saw her face. It was not rotted or monstrous. It was pale and gaunt, streaked with soot, cheeks hollowed by fear and hunger. Her eyes bore the flat, stunned awareness of someone who has watched her world betray her. Her mouth opened in a scream I could not hear, yet the pressure of it pressed against my eardrums and rattled my teeth. Images flickered again, synced to the contortions of her body. A stake, rough and splintered, driven into the ground. Ropes binding wrists and ankles, a circle of faces lit from below by fire, eyes reflecting orange, mouths twisted in zeal. The woman tied there, chest heaving, hair matted with sweat and ash, flames licking at her skirts, catching, climbing, her voice breaking as she begged, cursed, or both. I felt her panic like a physical current, flooding me with a terror so complete it obliterated every comfortable thought I had ever had about witch hunts as historical phenomena. This was not abstract anymore. It was pain, trapped in place. The witch's room twisted around her reenactment. The walls bent inward as if pulled by heat. The beams overhead warped, seeming to sag and stretch in unnatural ways. The lantern's light elongated, smearing yellow trails across every surface. The bed trembled, its posts knocking against the wall in irregular rhythm. The floor beneath me rolled subtly, like the deck of a ship on a restless sea, threatening to throw off all sense of orientation. I tried to form words, to recite a prayer or a grounding phrase or even a simple sentence asserting my identity. "I am Daniel Reed," I wanted to say, 30 years old, doctoral candidate at the University of Cambridge, here to study haunted heritage, not to become it. My tongue felt thick. The only sounds that escaped were ragged breaths. The figure's head snapped in my direction. Her eyes met mine fully now, no longer dulled by distance or hair. They were ancient and searing, and behind the rage and horror there was another emotion I had not expected: accusation. Not just at her executioners, but at me, at anyone who came here looking for a thrill, for proof, for content. Anyone who treated her agony as data. Her arm lifted, hand outstretched. Flames that existed only in that overlay of vision licked around her wrist, but her fingers remained intact, reaching. When her hand passed within inches of my face, a wave of heat hit me so intense it stole the air from my lungs. In that heat I smelled not only burning fabric and hair, but also the distinct, sickening odor of human skin exposed to fire. My stomach heaved. The room spun. Something in my chest gave way, a crack in my composure that felt permanent. Then, as suddenly as it had escalated, the sound cut off. The banging ceased mid-strike. The scratching halted. The pressure in my ears released. The smell thinned, leaving behind only the baseline of dust and mold and distant smoke. I found myself curled sideways on the floor near the bed, my nails dug into the boards hard enough to splinter them. The lantern flickered weakly, but held. The corner was empty again. The shadow had returned to the wall, once more an inert stain above the place where the boards were slightly indented. Only one detail had changed. Before, the dark shape on the plaster had faced straight ahead, its outlines suggestive but not explicit. Now the head was turned, just enough that the impression of its gaze aligned with where I sat. Even in stillness, it felt aware. A thin, icy line seemed to connect my sternum to that mark, an invisible thread of recognition. Pale light edged the window. Dawn was leaking into Gloucestershire, soft and grey, making the ancient Ram Inn look less like a fortress of nightmares and more like a very old, very tired building in a damp English village. Survival instinct finally remembered it had a list of functions. I grabbed my notebook and my phone with clumsy hands, shoved them into my bag, and left the witch's room without looking back at the corner. The corridor outside was silent, but I felt the house watching me from every knot in the wood. I forced my legs down the stairs, my hands sliding along the banister polished by centuries of equally terrified grips. The owner was in the front room putting on a kettle when I reached the bottom. He glanced up, took in my face, and did not bother asking if I had slept well. "You saw her," he said quietly. It was not a question. I nodded once. My voice was not ready to tell him that I had seen more than a simple apparition, that something in that room had reached across time to shove a woman's last memories into my skull. He poured tea and set a cup in front of me. The steam curled upward, smelling of earth and tannin, and some normalcy I had lost in the night. "Some people leave in the middle of it," he said. "Some last 10 minutes. Some last till morning and pretend nothing happened. You do not look like someone who will pretend." I managed to ask about the cat, whether there had been only one, whether they had reburied it or kept it. He confirmed the basic details I already knew from articles on haunted history and apotropaic practices. The mummified cat had been found inside a wall near the witch's room during rewiring work, along with some other items, shoes and bits of pottery. Some pieces had been moved, some left. The house, he said, did not like being changed. The word house sounded insufficient. I left the ancient Ram Inn less than an hour later. The morning air outside felt wrong against my skin, too clean, too unconcerned. I could hear birds and a distant car, ordinary sounds that should have been comforting. Instead, they only underscored how profoundly separate the world inside that building was from the world around it. On the train back toward Cambridge, I tried to structure my notes to match my usual academic format. Environmental conditions, personal impressions, cross-references to documented phenomena from other visitors at the ancient Ram Inn, particularly in the witch's room. I wrote phrases like true paranormal experience and haunted history England and witch trials in Gloucestershire in the margins, markers for later chapters in my thesis. But my handwriting kept trailing off into jagged lines. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that corner and the way the figure's head had turned, the way her eyes had met mine with the full weight of centuries of betrayal. That was weeks ago. I am back in Cambridge now, surrounded by stone and order and layers of scholarship. My supervisors are enthusiastic about the richness of the material. Friends in the department are jealous that I secured a night at one of England's most infamous real haunted places. At night, when the city quiets and the college courtyards empty, I sometimes wake with the sensation that the air in my small flat has thickened, that the walls are one slow breath away from buckling inward. Twice I have caught, in the periphery of my vision, a darker patch on the corner of my bedroom wall, about the size of a human head, angled just enough that it feels like it is looking at my bed. When I turn toward it fully, the mark is gone, leaving only the pale paint and a faint smell of cold stone and burnt herbs. I am a historian. I am trained to document, not to believe. Yet when I sit down to write about the ancient Ram Inn, the witch who hid in the corner room is no longer a legend to me. It is a presence that has left a trace on me, a mark as invisible and as real as the stain on that plaster. And I am no longer entirely sure whether I left that room or whether some part of it followed me here and is waiting patiently for me to close my eyes again.